And this is where we begin, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. John King right over there, Bob Seidenschwartz from the Montana World Affairs Council. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
All right, we've already kind of primed the
I
audience
enjoyed that first half hour.
It was fun. All right. But we want to introduce a special guest, a young lady who's actually visiting with us on the phone from South Carolina. She's Sarah Hesterman, 18-year-old advocate for gender equality and sustainable development. Hesterman has spread awareness for girls and women's issues with the UNDP, UN Women, UNICEF, UNFPA, the Malala Fund, and other global organizations. She's also advocated for the UN's Sustainable Development Goals on Capitol Hill, at the headquarters of the United Nations, and at the White House. Hesterman served as a teen advisor for the United Nations Foundation's Girl Up campaign from 2015 to 2016, and she's currently a delegate at the United Nations Youth Assembly. So, without further ado, good morning, Sarah Hesterman. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Welcome to the pinnacle of your life now, Missoula, Montana.
Sorry. It's all downhill from here, kid.
What will you do when there are no peaks to climb?
That's right. No more worlds to conquer.
Very exciting for me.
Anyway, all right. Well, Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're in South Carolina. Are you a native there or what?
Sure. I'm not a native. So both my parents were in the Air Force. My mom retired when I was 9, and then my dad retired when I was 17. We were definitely moving around a lot. I moved about 12 times, so they just decided to settle down in South Carolina. And of course, I come back to visit them on my college breaks, but not a native. Don't really think I'm a native of anywhere at this point. So,
what state do you most identify with?
Probably Washington, D.C.
Wow.
I would say. Yeah, I lived there 4 times, so I think I would say Washington, D.C., but, classic military child answer. Not really.
You sound so optimistic. I don't understand.
I'm the same way. We lived in just outside of Alexandria, Virginia for a while my dad was stationed in D.C. So, yeah, there's a lot of kids like us. Right, yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sarah, I wanted to introduce you to the audience because there's the World Affairs Council does a lot of educational programs with high school students across the state. And sometimes we get caught up in a lot of what our young men and women are not doing in the world, but there's a whole generation of people out there that are very active and engaged. And you and myself had the opportunity to have, over the last 2 weeks, about an hour's worth of conversation. I came away tremendously impressed to the point where I said, yes, I would like to introduce her to our audience because I want people to see what is happening out there that's not always getting the headlines, getting the news, and the activity and the interest and engagement of young people in this country and the world. And Sarah, you today are representing that. So I'd like to start with a little bit of a story that goes back to Qatar. And I had asked you, how did you become involved, particularly in some of the women issues that are important to you? And you had lived in Qatar for a while. And I believe, if I'm correct, several of the places in the Middle East. And, of course, culturally, socially, there's some differences. So tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that you had in these countries and what kind of led you to start looking at issues and differences between how you grew up and the cultures that you were living in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I would say in the context of Qatar specifically, what kind of led me to this gender equality advocacy that I was interested was not necessarily the differences that I experienced from, growing up predominantly in the United States and then moving to a new country when I was 15, but more so kind of seeing my expectations shattered in terms of the roles that women had in society and kind of the situation leading up to that. And you and I talked about how I think the number is now 70% of college-educated people in Qatar or graduates are women, and it was just kind of this expectation-shattering moment where you have to question why that's happening. And I don't know, it just seemed like this universal experience of when there's one demographic in society that, in any society around the world, that is being, whatever word you want to use, marginalized, suppressed, how that ferments and what the outcome of that is. And in Qatar specifically, it seems like it was a higher population of educated women, and then I compare that to my experience in the United States. Also, me growing up in the U.S., what expectations I felt like I had whether that be expectations for how educated I was, expectations for anything from how I was supposed to act to how I was supposed to look like, and comparing that to kind of people my age, other girls growing up in the Middle East as well, and seeing where those differences lay, really motivated me to take on this role. But I think overall it was definitely being surprised in a way of how motivated women are and how there's kind of this opportunity to take up a bigger place maybe that was not allocated previously to women in Qatari society. And I do, in part, think that my expectations came from a certain media stereotype that's perpetuated to young people. And, yeah, I think just having that completely shattered is what led me to this journey of, I kind of just want to say, that's not true, and I saw this, and this is my experience, so let me share that with you.
Sure. Now, we're up against our first break, Sarah. We'll take a break about every 10 minutes. But when we come back, if you wouldn't mind, I know hundreds of teenagers, 15 to 18, and I'm wondering, something within yourself said, this is not right. But you're a kid, and kids often feel very powerless. They feel like they see what's going on in the world, but they in many ways feel they can't do anything about it. I want to find out how you and the steps you took to start doing something about it. Can we talk about that when we come back?
Absolutely.
All right. And by the way, we have 3 lines open. If you want to visit with Sarah Hesterman, give us a call, 721-1290, and we'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback. Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Always a special edition with Bob Seidenschwartz joining us in studio, and Sarah Hesterman's also with us. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, real quick. I just wanted to get a little bit of a taste of what you actually saw. I've never been to Qatar. I've had some friends that have lived there before. And you said you had witnessed some disparities. But speaking not in generalities, but some specifics, what are some of the things you saw women going through in that country that you felt were out of line with what you experienced in your growing up in America?
Sure. So to be honest, the first time that I really noticed any true disparity was not actually when I was in Qatar. It was when I traveled to Jordan, and that was in 2013, in the fall of 2013. My mom and I took a trip to Jordan, and we went to Amman, Aqaba, many different places. And that was when it first hit me that there were girls that weren't getting an education and receiving the same opportunities that, I had been afforded my entire life. Just driving down the street, you can see, obviously, a massive influx of refugees has gone into Jordan. Jordan's been very accepting of a large number, and you can see people living in tents on the side of the road. And I saw a lot of girls my age that I knew weren't getting an education, and that specific moment was kind of the catalyst for me for getting into my advocacy work. And then in Qatar, some specific examples that I can talk about, really kind of on a level, a personal level, women getting talked over in certain situations, such as, I can't even, it's not, I can talk about these concrete examples where, I've seen women getting talked over in public, maybe when they're trying to speak to a male, or it's these concrete examples exist, and I can go into further detail, but I guess the point I'm trying to stress is it's nothing that I didn't see in the U.S. as well. So there is obvious disparity. However, women in Qatar have rights. They do have a lot of rights in comparison to Saudi Arabian women. There's a large difference. So I think even within the region itself of the Middle East, the disparities between the countries for the rights that women have is important to look at as well. And yeah, I mean, of course, there's in a traditionally patriarchal society, in a male-dominated society, there will be instances where women might be treated treated as property if they are married. That can happen, and I think that happens in the United States as well. But the major catalyst for me getting into this work was visiting Jordan and kind of having that face-to-face experience with refugees, I think is, so I lived in Qatar at the time, but it was going to Jordan that really made me realize these issues.
So I guess the question I asked before the break is, why you? At this time, you were like, 13 at the time or 15 at the time?
15.
You were 15 at the time. So 15-year-old girls, I know quite a few of them, and very intelligent, very, they got lots of interests, things like that, but they don't think about changing the world that much. Why you?
I don't think it was anything special about me. I think it was the environment that I was in. I went to an international school, and I was surrounded by people who were really smart and really understood what was happening in their countries and brought these perspectives to the table. And we had these discussions every day about global issues, but they were from a lens of, like, personal lenses from people that lived in these countries. And I think it was more so the environment. It just felt right to bring people together and say, like, we have such a diversity of experience. We have different assets. Why not bring them together? Even if we're high schoolers, we can still do something. And I do find that there's a lot of young people understand that they can use social media and they can use texting and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram to generate some kind of change, because if that's where a lot of the audience, like, if the demographic as an audience is turning their attention to these platforms, they think we can use them for good. So I do see maybe not a trend, maybe it's been happening for as long as we know, but of young people taking up this responsibility and saying, I see that this is wrong, or I see I can do something here and I'm going to. But for me, it was definitely having people around me that were interested in changing the world and doing these big things. And I thought, why not actually put a foot forward and do something tangible?
Okay. Now, we have a Facebook comment.
Yeah, we have a question for you. And I think it's probably, if you want to solve a problem, you have to kind of know what's causing it. Elena wants to know what you are attributing the disparities to when you see these problems in the world, specifically the stuff you had mentioned in Jordan and the disparities. Mm-hmm.
So
what do you
within the context of disparities regarding women's issues and rights?
Where do you attribute the source of that disparity or the problem behind it?
Sure. So personally, for me, since I deal with the inequalities that adolescent girls face in that specific demographic, I definitely attribute that globally to kind of when we're talking about who we value in society and who we think can have the greatest impact. And I often think that adolescent girls are left out, and I attribute that mainly to just seeing, let's take young boys, for example. If we're talking about educating young boys, they have a lot of expectations as well to be the providers in their family, to take care of their future wife and children. And I think that it's these expectations, an expectation game that we're getting into, where adolescent girls are left out, and young girls are left out and not receiving education, being kept at home, having these really strict gender roles being perpetuated around the world, where young girls are not being allowed to take hold of every opportunity that they possibly could be, simply because there's expectations for them to grow up, be housewives, instead of, if they want to be a wife or not, if they want to be maybe a doctor or a teacher, they can't, just simply because there's this idea that they already have a role to play in the future. And so I definitely I think it starts young. I think these disparities happen because immediately when a child is born, their gender is determined. I think they're placed into a box based on years and years of just the same.
So, Sarah, can I ask you? I'm sorry to interrupt you on this. So, when you're looking at this situation, given your experience to this point in your life, what then are you advocating for that would be a change agent? And then, of course, what are the consequences based on that advocacy that you can identify actually has had some impact? We do need to go to a break. So when we come back from that break, and we've got a caller, I'll restate that question and let you answer that.
You bet. So we appreciate Sarah being with us this morning. Sarah Hesterman is visiting with us from South Carolina. And Marilyn, we're going to get you on after we answer all these different questions. We also have two other lines open if you'd like to get involved in the conversation. Our number is 721-1290. We'll be right back.
Either was Moses.
All right, enough. Yeah. I'm Methuselah. You're Moses.
Yes.
I got it. All right. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. All right. Sarah Hesterman's joining us on the phone and from in South Carolina, but we also have Marilyn on the line. Marilyn, you have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
Good morning. Yes. Thank you for taking my call. Okay. I'd like to know if she has ever heard of a woman named Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I've read a couple of her books. One is called Infidel, one is called Nomad, and another one is called The Caged Virgin, an Emancipation Proclamation for Women in Islam. So this lady, Ayaan, she has been fighting and trying to be a voice for women from Middle Eastern countries for years. She lived there. She lived through it, and she escaped to Holland and became part of Parliament there, and she's now in the U.S., and she was recently testifying in Congress and was basically mocked by many of the people there, not listened to. So I'm wondering if you know of her and have read her information, and I would encourage you to get to know her if you haven't.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Yeah. So, what do you think, Sarah? Have you heard of her?
I have. I know. I've heard a lot about the criticism that she faces and I think she's threatened a lot for the way that she speaks about Islam and talking about her experience. So yeah, I've definitely heard of her. I would love to be more familiar with her work, but I think that speaks to a really important point that when people are talking about their realities and their experiences, no matter what, we need to listen, especially if they're foreign to us. So it makes me very sad that, she would be mocked in any way or ears wouldn't be open to what she has to say, because I think everybody's reality is important. And yeah, I find it's very interesting to me and very sad to me that someone would receive threats for being open about their lives. But yeah, I've definitely heard of her. Not extremely familiar with her work, though. So,
well, I'm really curious to hear exactly what you do. I mean, aside from talking on the radio,
which is your first time doing.
Well, obviously, yeah. This is the pinnacle of your career. We already mentioned that. But what is your engagement with these problems? I mean, do you go and help people get educated, or what?
Sure. So the bulk of the work I do, I think, kind of saddles two worlds where congressional advocacy, so advocating for actual legislation that targets girls' issues. For example, the Girls Count Act, which was to ensure birth registration for not just girls but boys globally. The reason it's called the Girls Count Act is to put the focus on the specific disparities and inequalities that exist when girls are not registered at birth, because it prevents their access to education, land ownership.
And this is through what agency? The United Nations?
The United Nations Foundation. So The UN Foundation supports the work of the UN, but does not actually receive funding from the UN. It's a 501c. So that is one aspect of it, and
Sarah,
then the other aspect is...
Sarah, my apologies, because your information like this, I need to ask you to actually talk about, when you're talking about registration, what specifically are you describing here? Because you just mentioned that in relation to property rights or various things. So
birth certificates.
Give us some examples.
Because they don't exist if they're not, have some sort of,
Yes.
So in effect, they don't exist. They're non-citizens then. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So it's essentially this concept of the invisible child when they're not given identification at birth. It's pretty much like they don't exist.
What regions of the world is this happening primarily?
Honestly, I think this kind of goes back to the Sustainable Development Goals as well. We need stronger institutions, so institutions that are able to give documentation to children, give documentation to girls. I think what the bill specifically was looking for was to improve the registration and documentation systems of countries so they can make sure that they have the specific mechanics to actually register every child.
Well, not only that, but if you don't have a birth certificate, You're never going to get a passport. You're never going to be able to get a driver's license
or benefits, educational opportunities,
or even be able to register to vote in whatever country you might be in. I mean, just because that's what blows my mind is that there are so many, probably millions of children whose births have never been recorded, and they're just, as you said, they're lost, right?
Yes, exactly. There's in 2012, 4 out of 10 children were not registered at birth. So I think it's a bigger problem than people realize.
And Sarah, I would venture to say that this is primarily taking place in developing countries. You're not going to see this. You may see it occasionally, but in developed countries, Western Europe, United States, and various other places, we have strong institutional accountability. So it is something I suspect is going to be really in the developing world.
Well, this is the problem. It seems to me this is probably an infrastructural issue,
right?
And a government. Yes. If you open a country where the government is limited and doesn't have function and can't service, you're going to have a whole bunch of problems, including the inability to process a birth certificate.
Imagine living in the Sudan right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the problem's a little bit more fundamental. But I guess my question for you was, have you seen developed countries that also suffer with this problem of, and I think we could consider Qatar fairly developed, but would you consider that or Jordan as countries that can't do this birth certificate thing the right way or aren't?
I personally, just because of the work I do is predominantly with developing countries and countries in the global south, I have to say that I'm not familiar with this being an issue in developed countries. That's not to say that it's not. I'm sure that I think it probably would be in some cases. I don't know. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that. But I think the fact in itself that there's nearly 300 million children who haven't been registered at birth that are living on on Earth today in itself is a huge issue. But no, I would definitely have to familiarize myself with that because I'm not sure.
Sure. We're going to come right back. We have 3 lines open. Want to visit with Sarah Hesterman? Give us a call. 721-1290 is our number, or 1-800-568-5309. You can also make your comments or questions on our Facebook page. We'll be happy to relay those to Sarah. She's going to be with us for about another 28 minutes, so if you have a question, she's with the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. We'll be right back. We're back on Talkback. This is the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. What, Bob? What?
I never thought I'd see Boogie Nights being demonstrated by John.
Anyway, all right, Sarah Hesterman joining us here on the radio, the Montana World Affairs Council. Now, the question I wanted to ask you, Sarah, is do you ever find that you and your compatriots in the organizations that you're in, because you're teenagers, you're young people, that in many ways, older people, especially bureaucrats, government officials, politicians, kind of pat you on the head and say, "Oh, that's so nice that you guys are getting involved.
Let's get a picture with her."
Yes, thank you. Now go away. You know what I mean? So, do you find it difficult to be taken seriously?
Sure, absolutely. I think I would say that. I can only speak for myself, but that's personally the biggest challenge that I face doing this work. And there's this weird juxtaposition of wanting a young voice in the room and wanting someone you can kind of hear talk about their experiences or their ideas, and then it's exactly what you said, that patronizing reaction, moving on. So it's a juxtaposition between wanting to have youth voices in the room but also not listening to them. And I think there are so many youth that are tuned in, well educated on issues. I would go as far as to say young experts on the issues that they're dealing with that have very valid, substantiated viewpoints. And I think the biggest challenge I've personally seen is just not having that taken serious.
So, Sarah, I would validate that with my years of work with the council and actually being in high schools. The students are hungry for people that will take them seriously, that will act in a mentoring position, and that will give them voice to their real concerns and issues. And you will be amazed at the responses, insights that they come out with. But it's not just enough to say, "Oh, that was an interesting conversation." You've got to move into some sort of actionable type of behavior to make it meaningful.
I'm going to be the curmudgeonly old person in the room for a second.
All right.
I guess it's just when we talk about changing the world and things like this, there's a lot of utopianism, idealism that can come to play, which I find youth, including myself as a youth, have an unlimited supply of. However, sometimes when we try to address issues, the agency is so important, and the ability of that agency to change matters of fact on the ground is often very limited. And when we talk about things like, for example, the UN itself, but even once more removed, the United Nations Foundation, I would be, as a 36-year-old now, I just had my birthday, I would be very skeptical about those agencies being able to do much in this realm.
Sure. I can answer that by specifically talking about Girl Up, which is a campaign I've worked with for the past few years, where I think it seems like that from the outside, but taking a closer look at what's happening is this specific campaign takes young girls and boys, transforms them into leaders to be able to advocate for issues by educating them, giving them the courage to do so, empowering them. And in that way, they raise funds to kind of catalyze that institutional change, to make sure the funds that they're raising goes towards educating a girl that's just like them, that just doesn't have the same opportunity. So I think Is it a
mentorship program then? Is that kind of what it is?
It's not a mentorship program. What it is I guess it could be described as that, but young people come together and form clubs, and then those clubs of young people, young students, work together to advocate for these issues within their school communities.
Okay, so this is something that's in the United States?
Yes, it's in the United States, but it's also in, I want to say, over 70 countries around the world, too. It's very global at this point, but it started in the United States. The majority of the clubs are in the United States.
Now, Sarah, can you just cite, right off the top of your head, one really good concrete thing that you and the organizations you work with have done that, rather than just proposing something or here's a great idea, that have actually begun to make a difference in your world?
Sure. So I can directly relate that back to a campaign called School Cycle that Girl Up does, I believe, every year for the past few years now. And my friends and I raised over $5,000, just my small group of friends and I, to send bikes to girls in Guatemala so they could get to school safely, just because when especially in rural communities, when you're traveling to school, the roads may be uneven, dangerous. There's a higher risk of possibly having things stolen from you, being assaulted. So those bikes gave them a way to get to school in a safe manner, an effective manner, because it's faster. So that's a tangible thing. I think that money directly went to locally sourced bikes, and those locally sourced bikes went to girls in rural Guatemalan communities. So there's one example. Who supports you? I mean, is there one group of people that tends to support you more? Is it like a liberal community or a conservative community, or is it just kind of a hodgepodge of folks who believe in what you do? You know what? I believe that it's. I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I really think it's, like you said, a hodgepodge. And the reason I believe that is so is because when we're looking at the idea of giving girls equal opportunity and allowing them to take hold of the human rights that the UN outlines for them, I don't think that's a liberal or conservative issue. I think that's a human issue, and I think anybody from any political background can and should support that. So it's a mix. There are girls of all different political orientations that support Girl Up or in Girl Up clubs, and it's not fair to discount any of their political views, because I think they're coming into their own person and they should be empowered to make those choices for themselves.
Just to give some validation of what Sarah's saying, it wasn't that long ago we had a gentleman on from Hillgate High School. It's going back to Sierra Leone.
Right.
And he's raising money so that women don't have to carry water, on their head. They can use something that's much more physically.
Hippo rollers.
The hippo rollers.
Right.
Right here in Missoula, we have Dave Cates and his organization that's gone down to Guatemala every year, or Honduras. And we've had people on the radio that have talked about in Central America reaching into villages, doing some of the most simple of acts that are difference-making. So for you and I, we take for granted every day our water works, our electricity goes on. That's not the way most of some of these regions responds to.
And you know, my sister herself, she does she helps people get jobs in Chicago. Before that, she worked on water systems in Honduras. But all these programs, it seems the ones that actually change lives and impact people, they're like circumventing the government system, right? It's like private money goes to a small group of people that identify a problem and try to address it directly. It's not like
many cases that's true, John.
It's not a round table of people in suits with papers shouting at each other about.
And remember,
diplomacy.
Sarah, there is one phrase that will help you more than anything else. That is, it's much easier to get forgiveness than it is to get permission. Okay, so we're gonna come right back. 721-1290. We have 3 lines open. You want to visit with Sarah with us for about another 15 minutes or so, and we'll be right back. All right, no tapping on the board there, Bob. Sorry. 721-1290 is the number, 1-800-568-5309. We're talking with Sarah Hesterman. She is an 18-year-old advocate for gender equality. We've been talking about some of the work that she's been doing, not only here in America, but especially in her travels in the Middle East. But we do have a caller. Let's get Hunter on the line. Hunter, you're on with Sarah. Go ahead.
Hi, Sarah. No, it's awesome that you're on the line. But a little history about myself. My parents came from a third world country. Fast forward to a developed country here in the U.S. And that's, I think, what we're all misunderstanding is we think that these undeveloped countries have problems in their country, but there really is no problem. It's just the efficiency of life. It's just not really, I want to say like convenient, but finding all these sources that better their lifestyle is great, but we're also intervening in their natural way of life that it teaches them their life skills. And so that's basically what I have to say, and I think that's something. It's great that you're going out there finding all these, helping these undeveloped countries people, but in a way you're also interrupting their natural way of life. But that's just kind of the comment that I have.
Okay. All right. So have you found that to be a problem, Sarah, with folks in developing countries that they may resent a little bit? Here's an American telling us what to do?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to say I think that's a great point. That's obviously very true, and that happens a lot. Where I come from with that point is my goal and the work that I do is not to in any way disrupt anybody's culture, disrupt their way of life. I simply want to make sure that girls are given the opportunity to be educated and have the same experience. And I sometimes, what I aim for and what I strive for is to ensure that there is equal opportunity to access education, and it is not my place to try to change anybody's culture, to try to disrupt anybody's way of life.
Real quick,
as long as it doesn't stand. Yeah, go ahead.
Many cultures, I think, if we're honest, stand in the way of your goals, though. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we have cultures in the world right now that don't see educational equality as a virtue.
Sure.
And so you have to, in some cases, be countercultural.
John, let me ask this question to both Sarah. Okay. I'm sorry, to Sarah and John when he gets back here, which is when we say there are countries that don't that stand in the way of this, I don't know of a country in its totality that actually stands in the way. I think you will find areas of greater resistance or lesser, but within every country there's people who are fighting for different degrees of equality and opportunity. Would you say that's an accurate statement, Sarah?
I think that's an accurate statement, and I think it is really. I think what the most important thing to take out of that in the statement is that empowering people within developing countries to, carry the banner for these issues and push for being advocates in their own communities, coming from those communities, knowing what's best in terms of cultural change maybe or progress is really important. So I definitely would say that that's a true statement, but I think also, someone like me who didn't grow up in a certain culture shouldn't be the one that's advocating for change in that culture because I don't know it as well. So I think, and that's something Girl Up does too, is empowering girls and boys to carry the banner for their own communities instead of having, some like a kid who isn't fully able to understand all of the intricacies and all of the different moving parts of someone else's culture. So I think that's where I stand on that.
Jumping off from what John said, have you or any of the people that you work with, especially in the areas where John just had mentioned, where education for girls is not something that is promoted, have you ever received any threats or go away, you're bothering our way of life, and how do you push through that?
I personally have not, simply because I think that what I'm doing is a bit different than maybe some of the other fields that might experience that more. I actually haven't heard stories of people that I know doing advocacy work that have heard that, but I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it happens, and I do think that a lot of things that people do disguised as advocacy and activism does encroach on other people's ways of life, and there just has to be a deeper understanding and consultation with people from said backgrounds to better move forward in that process. But for me personally, I have received pushback, I guess, just because a lot of what I do is often, the word feminism is ascribed to it, which is great. I call myself a feminist. I think that there is a lot of rhetoric surrounding that word that people are reactionary to. And so in that case, yes, I have received some pushback for that, but overall, not really.
Too bad, so sad. Yeah. All right, let's get Jim on the line. Jim, you're on with Sarah. Go ahead.
Am I up?
Yes, Jim, go ahead, please. You're on with Sarah Hesterman. Go ahead, sir.
If you want to do something to help women everywhere, you should really analyze what Islam is. And I mean, especially here in the United States, you need to work to keep Sharia law from becoming a reality in our cities. You need to see Islam for the haters that they are of women. That's my point.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. So have you experienced that in your travels?
No, I haven't. I think for me personally, I respectfully disagree with that statement solely because what I've seen, because of the friends that I have who are very strong Muslim women and the strong Muslim businesswomen I know and the doctors and the teachers, their religion is something that they use as a personal tool for empowerment in pursuing those opportunities. And so I think my experience just getting to know, it's easy to kind of fall into that trap of criticizing other religions or maybe criticizing other people's way of life just because we're, right now especially, it's just a really divisive time. But I can confidently say from my own personal experience, every religion, every organized religion has faults, and I'm not excusing anything that might be perpetuated by any religion that is increasing disparities for women. But I will say that from personal experience, I have a very strong base of friends who are Muslim who find that their religion empowers them to be confident women.
Okay.
So,
all right, and we're up against the break. Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to say, to Jim's point, the Middle East and Islam in general is a kaleidoscope of many different views, many different perspectives. If you're living under the thumb of ISIS or Wahhabism or in various countries in North Africa, in certain areas,
like the Taliban,
you can probably make a case for what Jim is talking about. But Islam, on its totality, you will find many people representing many different perspectives and views within that context.
Okay, we're going to take a 1-minute break. Come right back. Still 3 lines open. Only a few minutes left to visit with Sarah, who's visiting with us from South Carolina. We'll be right back.
Yes.
Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. I'm Peter Christian. Bob Seidenschwartz, John King. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm curious if your organization, Girl Up, has addressed the issue of gendercide.
Gendercide, so the killing of girls when they're...
Yeah, about 2 years ago, we had a filmmaker on. He did a documentary called It's a Girl, the 3 deadliest words in the world. about the habit in many countries of killing small
John,
female
can you give
children.
examples of the areas? What countries? What did he specifically say? What countries or regions?
A lot of Asian cultures specifically.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, I can give you a firsthand account. We had a child that was gestated in Japan but was born in the U.S. My first daughter, Naomi, and we weren't allowed to get to see any of the sonograms up until a certain point, and that point was after the time where you could abort a baby. So if we wanted to choose to abort our baby in Japan, we would have had to choose to do it without knowing the gender of the baby.
Okay.
And the reason they did that, in my understanding of that reason, was that they didn't want people to abort female babies in preference for males.
Right. And China has a long history of having done that also.
Anyway, so I guess my question for you is: have you taken that? Of course, other countries do that, and there's actually people coming to the United States to abort children so that they can go through that process. There's a sick world out there, but have you ever tried to address that issue?
So in my work with Girl Up specifically, I haven't spoken about that issue. Not to say that doesn't exist, but just for me, I haven't. But within, with the United Nations Youth Assembly and the different events I've attended at the United Nations headquarters, I can now remember that's definitely come up before in terms of how do we prevent, when you kill a child or a baby, that's obviously taking away their human rights to fulfill their life, and murder is the ultimate violation of human rights. But I think in the context that we talked about it, it's mainly changing that idea. Like I touched on it a little bit earlier, that girls don't have value, that they can't prove, or not even prove, but that they can't show that they are worthy of being a productive member of their family, of their community. And the conversation always kind of circles back to how can we ensure that parents and every person understands that every child deserves the right to grow up and assume the opportunities that they deserve. And especially when we're looking at this, I think that's a very clear case to prove that girls are too often looked at as not being worthy, and they're not recognized for their inherent value that they have as being a human. And I find that that's usually what the conversation centers on when we're talking about issues like that.
So, Sarah, we have just a few minutes left. I am putting you in front of a classroom of your peers right now. And given your experience and background, what message and what conversation do you want to have with your peer group? So please.
And try to imagine yourself in a high school class in Missoula, Montana.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, what I would say is definitely to be an advocate for any issue, for the environment, for other humans, to really care about something. You don't need to see it firsthand. You can simply read a story about it and be disgusted and want to do something. It doesn't need to be this firsthand experience. And I think with that also comes the fact that there is so much power in being a youth. These issues are what's going to affect us when we're older. We really have amazing platforms, social media platforms to spread messages on. It's kind of silly not to take up this ability to do something amazing and to even just educate other people by using these platforms. And I would really just say that the power of the youth voice is incredible. It has so much potential, and now more than ever is a time where we need to be learning to find our voice and know that even if we receive pushback and even if people don't take it seriously, what we have to say is serious and it does matter. And yeah, I would just really encourage everybody to find an issue that they really care about, and do whatever they can to fight for that, give it a purpose, and try to make the world that they live in a better place for everybody, for all humans, because we all deserve the same opportunities. So.
Now, you had mentioned that you make very good use of the technological tools. Sometimes we kind of disparage teenagers. You spend too much time on that darn smartphone. So I understand that you are using technology in a way that other people of your age can understand and get right on board with, right?
Yes, I use Twitter to reach out to other people to spread awareness for campaigns. You can use Facebook for that, Instagram, even Snapchat sometimes. I think what's most important for young people who are always on their phones, me included, I'm always on my phone, is to know that you can reach out to your representatives, you can reach out to your senators from your phone. You can reach out to people in power, and the more that you do it, the more of a chance you have of them seeing your message.
That leads me to my next question. Do you have any political aspirations when you, because you're already old enough now to run for Congress, right? You're 18.
I think I have a few more. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out. I'm still in college, trying to figure out what I want to do. But I could definitely see possibly a political career in my future.
So, Sarah, I'd like you to give me a call when you get serious about that. I have a little background experience. I think I'd like to run your campaign. I'll get Emma Harrison involved, and you two will be the first president first.
Real quick, Sarah, we're running out of time. If folks want to find out more about you or to contact you, how can they do that?
Sure. I have a website, so it's www.sarhest.com, and all of my contact information is on there, and just more about me is on there as well. So you can contact me directly through the website.
Sounds good. All right. Well, it's a pleasure visiting with you. You are an inspiration.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Take care, Sarah.
Hey, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Wow. What's coming up on tomorrow's fabulous radio program, Mr. King?
I believe we'll have fabulous open phones.
Open phones. Cool. All right. And by the way, just to let you guys know, John and I will be on vacation all of next week, Monday through Friday, for the 4th of July holiday. So you guys have a great day. We will see you tomorrow.